All right. Let's see, we have a few people in here. Okay. It's 1 o'clock, so I think we can go ahead and get started with our concurrent session number 2. It's the prevention, outreach, and awareness for Ontario and beyond. I'd like to start by thanking our gold sponsor, the City of Toronto, as well as our silver sponsors, Invasive Species Centre, Leuschner's Vegetation Management, Toronto and Region Conservation Authority, and CPRO, as well as our bronze sponsors, BASF and Corteva Agriscience. My name is McLean Smith. I am an environmental technologist with the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority, and I will be the moderator for the next several speakers. With that, I would like to introduce Dr. Bruce Young from NatureServe. Dr. Young is NatureServe's chief scientist. He has 30 years of experience promoting plant and animal conservation through the development of conservation status assessments, guidance for natural resource managers, and biodiversity indicator platforms. His leadership has led to first ever assessments of hundreds of insect pollinators and the publication of several reports on the status and assessment of pollinators in North America. As a major collaborator to the Global Amphibian, Mammal, and Reptile Assessments, Dr. Young has helped mobilize conservation efforts for these groups. His leadership in the development of the NatureServe Climate Change Vulnerability Index has fostered new insights on how climate change is affecting species. With that, please take it away, Dr. Young.
Thank you. Yes, gosh, I think we blew through a couple of minutes of my time here on that. I'll have to write a shorter one next time. Let me get my screen going here. And if you can just confirm that this is looking the way it should be. So McLean, are you seeing my screen?
Yes,
here?
that looks good.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much. And thanks to Emily and others for inviting me to give this presentation. I'm going to talk about how one way that you can use citizen science observations to develop watch lists for invasive species. And while the research and the thought that went into this was aimed at some applications in the United States, the workflows and scripts that we developed can be used anywhere in the world. So I think you'll find them of use in Ontario and Canada and beyond. The goal here is to provide a support for watch lists in places that are under-resourced, which where you might not have a staff botanist or something who can do such an activity professionally. So in this group, I don't need to talk about the importance of invasive species and the incredible damage they do to the ecosystems that we live in. So we'll move right on to talk about watch lists themselves. Because invasive species are such a threat, we need many different tools to address them, to eradicate them. And one of those is a watch list. And I just want to define that for the purposes of this talk. So it's a list of invasive species that you want to prioritize for surveillance, reporting, and actions to protect your target species and ecosystems. And specifically, the species on your watch list should be invasives that do not or are not known to occur in the area you're interested in, a park or a protected area or something like that, but they're known to occur somewhere outside, and for whatever reason you think there's a chance that they might show up in your protected area. And these watch lists are key to early detection and rapid response strategies that are typically used in protected areas. But developing a watch list has a few challenges because you need some pretty detailed knowledge about the invasive species occurring both within the protected area and outside of the protected area to know which ones to put on your list and which ones to prioritize your surveillance activities to look for. So if you have a botanist on staff, well, that can help. Usually he or she can help develop the watch list, but many cases you don't have that resource. And here I'm going to talk about kind of a technological assist that builds on the boom in citizen science data to help get around that challenge. So just with iNaturalist alone last year, there were 51 million observations. So the abundance of iNaturalist and other citizen science observations can help us when we're developing watch lists and, of course, many other applications. So the objectives of this study were to use citizen science records to develop watch lists for protected areas, prioritize invasive species for surveillance, and then develop this repeatable workflow for developing watch lists anywhere. We collaborated with the U.S. National Park Service in this project. And what we did was we selected the National Park Service units that had the lowest budgets. And this was from, we had 2019 budget figures, and the average budget for these units that we worked with was around $1.4 million. These are not the big showy national parks that you're heard of. These are the little national historic sites and things like that that probably you haven't heard of unless you live somewhere nearby. You can see on the map where they're located. They're spread across the United States. There weren't any that we chose in Hawaii because, of course, Hawaii invasive species are the #1 threat, and there's lots of resources there to address them. So overall, there were 36 units that we worked with. And then we tapped into this iNaturalist data. At the time we did the study, there were 11 million observations of US plants, which represented 24,000 species. There were 700,000 observations on National Park Service units, or over 6% of all observations actually took place on a US National Park unit. And we use the iNaturalist API to access the records in their database. So here's kind of the schematic of how we were thinking about this. We have a park there in the middle, and then we drew this imaginary 160-kilometer buffer around it. And what our script was aiming to do was to identify non-native plants that occurred in the buffer area, but not in the park. And the reason we chose 160 kilometers is assuming that people visiting the park are the #1 vectors for these invasive species to move around. That for these smaller parks, we didn't think anyone was really going to drive a lot farther than that to go visit the park. So that's kind of the thought process that went into the design. So we developed this script in R. And for each of the parks that we worked with, it created a watch list of the 100 most common non-native plants in the buffer that did not occur in the park itself. And the way it figured that out is it tallied the number of records for each species and just took the 100 species with the most records. It also spit out maps that showed for each species where there were records in the entire buffer area, and then a separate map, which was a close-up of the park and nearby areas of the park to see, if there's any records for that species, really close that you need to worry about in particular. So here's an example. One of the places was this Fort Vancouver National Historic Site. So it turns out that the site name Vancouver apparently has been used in places besides Canada. I learned that in this project. And there's this U.S. National Park Service unit there, kind of on the border between Washington and Oregon states there out on the West Coast. And you can see the script, we're just showing the results for 2 species here. You can, the green dots are this mountain ash. And on the purple squares are this sea rocket invasive. Both of these are invasive species. None of them are recorded in the park. And this starts to give you an idea of there's good things and bad things about this approach, because clearly the coastal species is never going to be a threat to this park. It doesn't matter if there's thousands of records. You probably wouldn't want to put it on your watch list, but the mountain ash, on the other hand, has lots of records from very close to the park, and that might be a bigger threat. So here's some kind of generalized results across the 36 parks where we worked. We found the parks range in term from 0 to 119 non-native species occurring within the parks themselves. Of these non-native species, we found from 0 to 1,100 iNaturalist records in the parks. And then in the buffers, this is where the watch list species are coming from. We found up to 875 non-native species and up to 134,000 iNaturalist records. And 81% of the parks had at least 1,000 records from the buffer areas from which to develop the watch list. So this tells us a few things. It tells us that there was a pretty good knowledge base from which to draw from, that we can feel pretty confident about the results, that yes, there was enough sampling effort, even though it was in a kind of a haphazard way. It wasn't directed in any sense. I'm sure you're curious, like, what are the parks that had no non-natives and no iNat records of non-natives? Well, that was Gates of the Arctic National Park. You see a picture there in the upper right. That's in far northern Alaska. There are iNaturalist records from there, but they're just not of non-native species. They're apparently pretty few and far between there. And then the site with lots and lots of non-natives in the buffer area was the Sagamore Hill National Historic Site. I think that's the site where some US president was born. It's east of New York City. You can imagine that's an area that has lots and lots of non-natives. So that's where the higher numbers came from. Here's just another example of the actual output. You're seeing a screenshot from this output from the script here for this Saint-Gaudens National Historical Park, which is located there kind of in the border between Vermont and New Hampshire. And for this one species, Talaria graminea, you see the picture there in the lower right. All the orange dots within the yellow circle might be a little bit hard to see. I'll draw around that. Those are all the sites for the places where the species has been recorded. So 56 occurrences within the buffer and 0 within the park. So that makes it a candidate for the watch list. And then it also spits out this other map, this close-up. So that pink line there, that's the protected area. And then you can see a couple of records for this species just across the river there. Not very far away, just a kilometer or so away. So this is something that might be of interest to the people there in the park itself. So then we did a real test. So everything sounds great on paper, but can people really use it? So we did this trial at Jean Lafitte National Historical Park. That's, I believe, in Louisiana. And what we did was we had the folks there run the script. They developed the watch list, but they had real botanists there that can then review the script and tell us how well it did. So here's what they found after they ran the script. First of all, and very importantly, they could actually run the script. So that was good. With the outputs, they gave us some helpful suggestions on how to change the outputs, give some tweaks to the code to make it more user-friendly for them. So that was welcome. And then the big thing, well, what did the botanists say when they had a look at the list? Well, first, they knew of a few non-natives that were on our watch list because there were no records within the park. They knew that they actually had been found already in the park. So the iNaturalist observers were a little bit behind the ball there. They hadn't, I mean, of course, no one's telling them to go out and look for these species, but just by random chance, no one had happened to upload observations of those species from within the park. And then the botanists also knew about a couple of important invasive species that they were concerned about that did not come out on our watch list. These were species that did have iNaturalist records, but they just weren't enough records for them to make it into the top 100 to be a species that ended up on the final list. So I think overall we did pretty well, and this experiment kind of tells us how to use this kind of a tool. And clearly some post-processing is necessary from the raw output. Any species that occur in habitats that aren't represented in the park, you might want to remove those, like that seaside example. If you can get a botanist to look at your output, you'll probably learn some more. You'll have a more sophisticated watch list after that. And then the other suggestion that came in is that there are ways to assess the invasiveness of species, like what's the degree to which they spread uncontrollably and cause negative impacts on the ecosystems that you're interested in. And if you could somehow use that information to prioritize the species on your watch list. And there's kind of lists. I think NatureServe at one point had this I ranking, which it did exactly that, assessed the invasiveness of species. And there's a couple of other methods that are out there. So that can help you. And then just to wrap up here, I want to say that we published this paper. It's in the Natural Areas Journal. There's the URL if you want to look it up. I'll leave this. This is my last slide, so I'll leave it here while we have questions. You can copy that down, or you can just search on the title. So in this paper, you can find the link to a GitHub site where you can download the script. And I can say that since we published the paper, iNaturalist changed their API, and we actually went in and adjusted how the script interacts with the iNaturalist API so that it still works. So it should still work for you. And like I said, it works anywhere. You just tell it, you give it the polygons for your protected area, and it goes out and looks for iNaturalist records, or you could even modify the script to have it look at some other database of citizen science data or whatever. So with that, I will stop. It looks like I'm hoping that we have a few minutes for questions. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Young. Yes, we have just a couple minutes for questions, and there are a couple in the chat. An anonymous attendee has asked, how reliable is iNaturalist data, especially for tricky to ID plants?
Well, so again, that's another reason to have a botanist look at your results, because the botanist will know which are the tricky to identify species and which are the less tricky to identify species. I think a lot of invasive species are pretty easy to identify. They're from far away. They're unlikely to have some sort of sister species or cryptic species that occurs in the area. So I think when you're looking for the invasives, you're going to run into that problem a little bit less.
We are just about out of time, so unless you can answer this one very quickly, did you take the watch list and rank the invasives by priority? Is there a way to do that in R?
You need some sort of external database on the invasiveness of species in order to do that. We did that as a test with the NatureServe the old I ranks for species. So it is possible you need that external data on invasiveness.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Young. I think we're going to take this opportunity to switch over slides. And once again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Sorry, McLean, I'm ready to get started anytime.
Fantastic. We can get a little bit ahead of schedule. So welcome to our second speaker of session 2. This is Brooke Schreier, who is with the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, presenting about the Invading Species Awareness Program's HIT Squad program and how collaboration and partnerships have contributed towards invasive species education, awareness, and monitoring initiatives in Ontario. Brooke is the program advisor with the Invading Species Awareness Program out of the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters. In his 8 years with the program, his work is focused on aquatic invasive species, including outreach and education, surveillance and monitoring, as well as tracking initiatives. So with that, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you, McLean. And I just want to say thank you to the Ontario Invasive Plant Council for inviting me to speak today. I am excited to talk about the Hit Squad program. It's been around for a number of years, well over a decade, out of the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters and their Invading Species Awareness Program. And the two things I really want folks to get out of this presentation today is understanding the value of this opportunity for young professionals, as well as the importance of partnerships in delivering this program. And then finally, how these positions actually feed into helping us in the province address some of the high priority species that have been showing up on our doorstep. And I'll show some case studies in a little bit that highlight some of that. So before I jump into the meat and potatoes of the presentation, I'd really like to focus on the Invading Species Awareness Program and who we are, just in case folks who are listening don't have that context. So ISAP, for short, is a 33-year partnership between the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters and the Ministry of Natural Resources. And it started as an education and outreach program, and really kicked off with the introduction of zebra mussels to Lake St. Clair in southwestern Ontario. And when it showed up, when that species showed up, the government was looking for opportunities to engage with demographics who might be moving invasive species, and in this case, zebra mussels. And so that's how the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters first, established the zebra mussel hotline that has since become the Invading Species Hotline. And our education outreach has just been growing ever since. So over 33 years, we've continued to really generate that education awareness. We also have a focus on monitoring and tracking. So we deliver the Invading Species Hotline, as I mentioned, which is 1-800-563-7711. And we also have the early detection and distribution mapping system for Ontario. So we're in charge of receiving reports from the general public to then review those reports to, identify whether those species are indeed the invasive species that they're reporting. And we do have a lot of expertise within the program. And I'll show you my team here on the next slide. But sometimes, we don't have that expertise in terms of identifying a species. So we rely on our experts directory to ensure that we can share those reports with those folks to really confirm. We also do eDNA, and then we also, which is environmental DNA. For those who don't know, it's looking for the occurrence of particular species in water bodies, and it's a great smoke alarm for a lot of invasive species. And then we also facilitate control and response efforts, and there's some examples there through the Water Soldier Working Group, the Wild Pig Surveillance Program that we deliver, Mystery Snail Program, and Marble Crayfish Working Group. So we have our hands in all sorts of activities, lots of high priority species, but then also, being in charge of receiving those low priority reports as well, and just making sure that the general public is receiving the information that they need. So here's my team, as I mentioned. This is 6 of 7, not including myself, or I would be the 8th of the team, and the 7th that's missing is Morgan here. And so my team, they work on all sorts of different things, and you can see that they've got their hands dirty in many respects, whether it's holding water soldier, holding sea lamprey, or being in the water deploying some traps like Morgan is here, looking for some marble crayfish. So a big part of our program, as I mentioned, is the education and awareness component, so on the ground. And here are some examples of the different demographics that we try to reach through our program. And whether it's boaters, campers, hikers, ATV users, if you're on the landscape, you're most likely in some way, potentially contributing towards the spread of terrestrial or aquatic invasive species. So we try to get out there, whether it's in classrooms or at the boat launch or at the beach, engaging with those individuals or those recreationalists that are on the water and on the landscapes to ensure that they, are aware of the potential risks, and as well as the simple steps that they can take to ensure that they're not spreading these things. We also, as I mentioned, deliver the early detection and distribution mapping system for Ontario. And we also have iNaturalist, which you just heard about in Dr. Young's presentation prior to this one. And iNaturalist has been exceptional tool for us here in Ontario. It has contributed towards the early detection and actually first detections of many high-risk species in the province over the last handful of years, and has actually single-handedly contributed towards 4 different species of crayfishes having been detected in the province of Ontario, dating back all the way to 2016. So it really is a crucial tool. And then, as I said, we also have, EDMAPs. We've received anywhere from, 2 to, well, upwards of about 10,000 reports on EDMAPs every year. And then the Invading Species Hotline, which receives well over 1,000 phone calls a year. But let's get into, what we're here to talk about, which is the Invading Species Hit Squad. And, the Hit Squad is an amazing program that has been around for well over 15 years. It's really focused on delivering that content on invasive species to local communities where these individuals are housed. And on the next slide, I'll show you all of our amazing partners that we have in this program. And without those partners, we would not have the locations to house our staff. And this upcoming year, for 2025, we're going to have well over 30 Hit Squad staff, which is incredible and really is foundational towards these people getting experience in the industry to then be able to move on and continue to do amazing work in the invasive species sector. I've seen so many in my, almost 10 years now in the program come through and learn so much and then be able to go on and achieve such great things with their careers. And here's some of the things that they've done on the landscapes and some of the tasks that they're going to be expected to do when they're hired. It really is dependent upon their host organization and what the priorities of that host organization is. But everything from developing resources to monitoring for invasive species, attending local events, all sorts of different things, installing signage, you name it. So here are some of our amazing partners. As I said, so many of these organizations are so pivotal to us delivering the Hit Squad and ensuring that the program runs smoothly. And now I'm going to jump into some of the things that some of our past Hit Squatters have been able to do with their time in the program. So last year, through the township of Strong, I had a volunteer who was able to participate in our wild pig surveillance program. And for those of you who don't know, wild pigs are a huge threat for Ontario, in particular our agricultural industry. And so in partnership with the Ministry of Natural Resources, we've been delivering the wild pig surveillance program through the Green Shovels Collaborative for the last number of years with the ultimate goal of raising awareness around wild pigs, but then also ensuring that there are, some cameras on the landscape. And, we have 50 cameras, and at the end of the day, we don't expect these cameras to necessarily, prevent the introduction of wild pigs. But what we're trying to do is really raise awareness in communities that maybe don't get as much attention on the invasive species front, such as Northwestern Ontario, which there is a very real risk of wild pigs crossing over into Ontario. So we had a Hit Squatter, email me and say, hey, I want to participate in this program. Can I do it for the summer? And I said, absolutely. So some of my staff were able to get him one of our kits, and then he was able to deploy the cameras for over the summer months, just to get that experience of creating a baited site and deploying cameras. As I mentioned before, eDNA sampling. So this year, Sam, he was with us a number of years ago as one of our Hit Squatters, and he was collecting eDNA samples, in this case for water soldier. And then on the far right, we had some Hit Squatters that participated in our mystery snail management and removal program, which has been around since 2021. And to date, over the last, going on 4 years now, have removed over 1 million invasive mystery snails. So all of our amazing volunteers under that program are just so foundational to the success of that program. And the Hit Squatters were able to be a part of that. So jumping into some case studies now. So case study number 1, I wanted to look at, just to give you guys some further ideas around the type of work that they're able to do, is the Invasive Species Center in the Wetland Canal. So, and this is a perfect example of how all of our tools in place, all of our partnerships in place can lead towards management. And going back to when this report first came in, it came in via the Invading Species Hotline in the middle of COVID. And it was reported by a government employee who was actually kayaking on the Welland Canal and discovered what they thought was European water chestnut. And for those of you who are not aware, European water chestnut is a prohibited species in Ontario under the Invasive Species Act. And so it is a high priority for the province. It's high priority for all those different non-government organizations working in invasive species. So through, our Hit Squad program, we were able to, provide funding through Canada Summer Jobs. And for those of you who are wondering where the funding does come from, it is through Canada Summer Jobs. And so, as well as some additional funding through Green Shovels. So we were able to hire some folks out of the Welland Canal in partnership with the Invasive Species Center. They've been doing amazing work. The first year we saw a fairly large population, pockets of European water chestnut, and they have been, slowly knocking it down. And this year, back in 2024, they have seen a significant reduction in the number of European water chestnut plants in the Welland Canal. So it shows you that, getting those people on the landscape, getting those people to report first and foremost, to be able to identify invasive species is the first challenge of the program for ISAP. And then once people learn how to identify, then they learn how to report. And then we have programs like this in place to assist with management and response. So case study number 2 is Peterborough. So this is one of our staff. This was Sarah. She was very enthusiastic. She loved getting out into the field to do work, engaging the public, or pulling, in this case, what you see there is water soldier. And she, engaged almost 2,000 people. She monitored over 1,000 sites on the Trent Severn Waterway for invasive water soldier, where it is currently found. And, she did assist Parks Canada, pulling some satellite populations. And then the big thing that she did last summer was actually conduct a very large eDNA blitz across a large portion of Southern Ontario in tandem with one of our other coworkers, Jordan, to look for the occurrence of marble crayfish DNA. And then she also assisted by doing some water soldier eDNA collection. So then moving on to Manitoulin Streams, another one of our great partners. This individual, they attended, education outreach events. They engaged almost 1,000 people in their time with Manitoulin Streams. They were able to assist them by developing social media and getting the word out there around all sorts of different campaigns that we have, whether it's clean, drain, dry, or don't dump your bait. And then they also were able to get into the field and remove all sorts of invasive species, whether it was Phragmites or white sweet clover, purple loosestrife, you name it. And then finally, the last one is Cataraqui conservation, which unfortunately, another COVID report, we had water soldiers show up in Red Horse Lake. And so with our partnership through Cataraqui Conservation, have been able to get hit squatters out of that location to remove water soldier. And as you can see there, last year, they almost removed 2,000 kilograms of water soldier. They installed signage, they engaged with the local community. They mapped out all the different populations of water soldier and engaged with 93 volunteers. And this is going to be an ongoing project that we have coming into 2025 as well, is, trying to manage the water soldier population in many different locations, but including Red Horse Lake and all the great work that Cataraqui did. So we're excited to have you potentially as part of our team. If any of you are listening and would like to become a part of the Hit Squad, just as of yesterday, the timing is impeccable. We did post 36 positions on ofhfoundation.org. So if this sounds like something that you would be interested in, or maybe somebody would be interested in, a young professional who's looking to get their foot in the door and looking to get some, work experience under their belt, have them, check out our website and submit an application. If you're curious around geographically, like where that's occurring, you can see here all the different locations. We have the Hit Squad locations, but something I didn't mention is our management technician locations. I did mention water soldier many times. And so with each of the crews that we have out going to manage these water soldier populations, we're also hiring a management technician to oversee the team. So there are the 4 locations where we're going to have teams this year, not including Peterborough. And then, as you can see there on the left, all the Hit Squad locations. So if any of those are, local to you, and again, you want to get involved, please feel free to check out our website and to submit your application. So if you guys would like to, get in contact with us, ask any questions related to Hit Squad or our program as a whole, we, as I said, we deliver all sorts of different content related to invasive species in Ontario. So these are just some of our staff that you can get in touch with and our contact information there. And then another thing I wanted to point out is that we do have invadingspecies.com, which is a great resource for folks to download invasive species content. We have all sorts of different quick reference guides, crayfish guide. We have all sorts of fact sheets, as you can see there. We have, resources dedicated towards terrestrial plants, forest pests and pathogens, you name it. It's all there. And if you, have any questions related to the website or again, our program, just be sure to get in touch with us. And so I'll close off by just giving you my contact information there, and more than happy to answer any questions that folks might have.
All right. Thank you very much, Brooke. That was a very exciting talk. And as somebody who has worked with the OFH in the past, partnered with, I highly recommend people reach out. They're a fantastic organization.
Well, thanks, McLean, for saying that.
Does anybody have any questions? I'm not seeing anything in the Q&A area yet, but if anybody wants to.
I always take that as a good sign.
No, well, there's one. Does the HIT squad have any experience with flowering rush?
Ooh, that's a great question. There's no projects that come top of mind for me. It's not to say that it's not something that can't be done. I do know that flowering rush is very difficult to manage, at least physically. It can be spread very easily. So doing physical management would require some, stringent protocols in place to assure that it's not being spread. But like I said, it's not something that we can't do. It's just probably something that we'd want to be careful around how we go about it. But yes, flowering rush is one of those species that has been on our radar for a number of years, and it is very challenging to tackle, especially given where it grows, given the fact that it is a riparian species. And given our limited resources in terms of herbicides, and then again physical management being so difficult, it is one of those species that is definitely a challenge to the invasive species industry. And I know flowering rush has been definitely spreading in northwestern Ontario. But if you'd like to get in touch with us and maybe ask some questions around the HIT squad or even flowering rush, please feel free to get in touch.
We have time for one more question if anybody wants to chime in. But other than that, again, thank you very much, Brooke. That was a fantastic presentation. All right, it is time for those of you just joining us for our third speaker of this session. I'm very happy to introduce Vicky Szymkowicz, who's a program coordinator with the Ontario Invasive Plant Council. Vicky joins the OIPC with a strong background in ecology, invasive species, and restoration. Prior to OIPC, she gained fieldwork experience in invasive species management through her role as a field assistant with the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority and as a conservation technician with the Nature Conservancy of Canada. She also obtained her Master of Science in Ecology and Evolution at the University of Western, where she studied the behavior and genetics of an invasive termite species. She's passionate about increasing public awareness of invasive species and their harmful impacts. She has also been a lifelong naturalist and enjoys being surrounded by nature. Today, Vicky is going to talk to us about her talk, Grow Me Instead, Promoting Invasive-free Gardening Across Ontario. So thank you so much, Vicky. Please take it away.
Thank you very much, McLean, and good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're enjoying the conference so far. Today, I'm going to be presenting on the Grow Me Instead guide, providing a brief overview of the GMI initiative, how it got started, some of the successes and challenges over the year, and future directions. The GMI program and initiative is a great example of a successful outreach initiative we've been involved with. So it was initiated, the Grow Me Instead was initiated when a committee called the Horticulture Outreach Collaborative got together around 2010, and they included representatives from a diversity of NGOs, academic institute, green industries, and government agencies Ontario, and they were passionate about focusing on the horticultural pathway of spread. And the Grow Me Instead guide was then launched in 2010, and it was adapted from other similar concepts like ISC BC's GMI booklet and similar programs in Australia. This booklet informs gardeners on common garden plants that have invasive tendencies and provides specific non-invasive alternatives to those species. It was created to assist gardeners in making informed choices about the plants that they buy for their gardens, so helping them to avoid purchasing invasive non-native plants. Due to differences in habitats across Ontario, we have a guide that's focused around Southern Ontario. That Southern Ontario guide is also available in French, and we have a Northern Ontario guide as well, and they're all available for free to download on our website. So just a breakdown of the Grow Me Instead guide. The northern and southern versions include photos and descriptions of invasive and non-invasive species, and it's broken down into sections, including aquatics, trees and shrubs, vines, ground covers, wildflowers, and grasses. So on each page, you have a photo of the unwanted invasive plant that you should avoid planting. So in this example, yellow flag iris is unwanted. And then there's 3 alternatives to suggest in its place. So cardinal flower, sweet flag grass, and northern blue flag iris. And what really is great about the GMI guide is just how well it's laid out, and the fact that you have images that are very easy to follow and understand. The alternatives were chosen based on their proven ability to be non-invasive or native, whether they were easily found in the horticulture industry or working towards more widespread availability, and that they had similar requirements, shape, and garden use as a potentially invasive species. So not all of the alternatives listed in this guide are native per se. It wasn't always possible to pair a native species with an invasive that has equivalent growth requirements. And then over the 13 years since the first edition, the Southern GMI Guide has gone through several updates. The latest was in 2020. That was a 3rd edition, and it's the most comprehensive guide yet, with 36 new species and several updates, such as the invasive plant, updated in plant profiles and photos, and more information on wildlife connections. And then looking forward into this year, we're excited about being in the early planning stages for another update to the Southern Grow-Me-Instead Guide. This update will involve partners from diverse perspectives and representation from all sectors of industry, and it should be the most complete update to date. The GMI resources have been remain one of OIPC's most popular OIPC resource. Over the years, thousands of people have picked up paper copies of the guides in many events that we were at, the horticultural trade shows, CD Saturday, Master Gardener events. And to highlight a few figures, between 2010 and 2020, over 70,000 GMI guides were distributed at trade shows throughout Ontario. Other GMI resources also distributed included bookmarks and seed packets. In more recent years, we've shifted to online, and so now we encourage people to download our GMI resources online. However, there continues to be a very strong interest in receiving paper copies of the guide, and we always receive multiple requests every year, and unfortunately have to turn a lot of them down because we just don't have the funding to print resources or storage space. So given the popularity of receiving a copy of this guide, we're hoping there's a solution that we can find in the future. And then over the years, the OIPC has presented countless Grow-Me-Instead workshops and webinars. Before the pandemic, we held a lot of the Grow-Me-Instead workshops in person to garden groups and master gardeners. And then in more recent years, we've shifted to providing online education. But moving forward this year, I will be presenting the GMI workshop in person again for a couple horticultural groups local to me, including the London Master Gardeners, London CD Saturday, and for the Straffordville Library that's near Port Burwell. In November 2023, the OIPC, in partnership with CCIS, held the first National Horticulture Conference through the remote platform. And I also wanted to note that in more recent years, there's definitely been a noticeable increase in engagement and interest on the topic of native gardening amongst the public, probably in part to social media. The last Grow-Me-Instead webinar we did in April 18 had over 500 people register and 200 attendees. So that's our most well-attended webinar to date. We continued to actively promote Grow-Me-Instead on our social media platforms throughout the year. And this continues to be our main platform for promoting the Grow-Me-Instead guide. So Facebook posts last year related to GMI reached 55,000 impressions, 3,000 engagements, 450 shares. And on Instagram, 200 impressions, 160 engagements, and 46 shares. In the past, we have hosted GMI field tours as well, where we visit sites such as touring invasive-free nurseries, or field site that demonstrates the impacts of invasive species or highlights restoration practices. These were typically done in conjunction with our annual OIPC conference. It was a bit before my time here. And then the GMI Nursery Recognition Program was also quite a while ago. It was in 2012, but it was active between 2012 to 2015. So this program was launched in 2012 through a federal government grant, and it recognized businesses that carried and promoted the sale of non-invasive and native garden plants featured in the Grow-Me-Instead guide. In the beginning, local coordinators from different conservation authorities in Ontario sent a letter to businesses within their watershed, and then follow-up phone calls or visits were made in person to those businesses. So those businesses contacted included nurseries, producers, landscapers, garden centers, and big box stores like Canadian Tire and Home Hardware. So nurseries who were interested in participating could order Grow Me Instead guides to distribute, header cards, and posters. And then for their participation, nurseries would receive recognition on our website. So this initiative is great because a lot of lessons were learned in the process. So it's no longer an active program, but this was one of the first outreach programs of its kind in the province that worked to engage industry and provide them with educational tools and resources to begin to stop the sale of invasive plants. And a lot was learned along the way. So there was a great interest among some businesses. However, only smaller garden nurseries or centers agreed to participate. Reaching out to big box stores proved challenging because many were unable to agree to participate. Even if they wanted to, they were interested or sold some of the alternatives because they required approval from head office. After initial contact with businesses in the first year of the program, many local coordinators didn't have great uptake with getting any additional businesses. So essentially, those that showed initial interest were the one that joined, and there were no further ones that would join. There was a great interest in educational workshops. And then lack of further financial support from grants also made it difficult for conservation authorities or OIPC or HOC staff to remain in contact with nurseries. So in terms of next steps, OIPC recently became an operating chapter of the CCIS. And as the CCIS has developed a national plant-wise program with a similar approach to engaging industry, we've focused our efforts in terms of being part of and supporting this program. And so that's my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much. There is a question in the chat. And is there any plan to update the northern version of Grow Me Instead? Could this be started this season? We print off your website, and there's a huge interest from our garden centers, gardeners, and horticultural groups for this resource.
Yeah, that's a really great question. We've been in discussions about that as well. We're actually thinking of the idea of perhaps combining the northern and southern and making a guide that kind of combines the two. So we're still in discussions about that. And if not, perhaps we will do a northern update in the future as well.
Thank you. Do you have any recommendations for removal if you have an invasive already in your garden?
Yeah, it kind of depends just in general, in your garden, the focus is going to be on manual control, like hand pulling and digging. It sort of just depends on the species. Some are easier to hand pull than others. Like if it's a rhizome species, it could be a little bit more challenging. You may need to do more digging with things like periwinkle or goutweed. But if it's something like garlic mustard, you can just pull it up from the roots, like as a taproot. You could also do tarping. That's another great way, great strategy in sort of a smaller garden area, like putting down cardboard or black plastic. So and if it is a really extensive invasion, like it's beyond manual control, and you have a large area of an invasive, you could consider hiring a contractor to chemically remove or by other means as well.
Great. Is there a plan to prepare a similar pamphlet to cover the topic of disposal so people don't, for example, send garlic mustard to the local compost?
Yeah, that is one of always our top on the list of resources we really want to publish, is one just specifically on disposal of invasive species, and do it for like small scale to large scale, because it's such a big topic and it's so important. And that's the way a lot of invasive species get spread. So yeah, it's the top of our list. In all of our BMPs, we do add in a little bit about disposal at the end and how to dispose of invasive species, but definitely something like really expanding on that would be great as well.
And I know that you had said the Southern Ontario guide was available in French. Is there any chance of having the other GMI guides translated to French?
Yeah, we hope so too. I hope if we're able to get funding and to support that, I definitely would want to see that too, because against the French version is still the original Grow Me Instead Southern Ontario. So definitely we'd want to see that as well.
Fantastic, thank you. We have some more time. If anybody else has any more questions they'd like to ask Vicky, we do have a few minutes, and this has been a fantastic presentation and a great question session. It's nice when we can actually have a little bit of back and forth. So both thank you, Vicky, and everyone who's participated in the Q&A.
Thank you.
All right, so with that, that is the end of this concurrent session. The next one should be starting. Sorry, the next one will be starting at 2:10, so we'll have a bit of a break after this. And thank you, everybody, for your participation, and best of luck. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.